Teri Louise. Sacrificial.
My name is Teri Louise Kelly. I'm a transgendered poet and writer. Probably the only transgendered poet in Australia, maybe the world, I don't know. I was born in Brighton in the UK, but I lived most of my life in London. I've lived in America, the Middle East, the Caribbean, New Zealand and Australia since 1987.
David Essex was a rock on. Hey, did you ever see Rock On? I went to see that when I was 14. I should have been 18, but I sneaked in the back with a load of bad boys, because I was a bad boy at the time, and we all did Bride of Rock.
I've written 3 memoirs and 1 poetry book with another poetry book to come. I've appeared all around Australia reading poetry, and I've been an invited guest at Emerging Writers Festival here in Australia, and Young Writers Festival and National Writers Convention.
I knew I was from Graham Greene, Clockwork Orange, Bride of Rock. I knew I was the man in Brighton. But it turned out that I wasn't the man in Brighton because I rocked. And I wasn't a stick of rock with Brighton written all the way through it. I was Teri Louise Kelly with Fucked Up written all the way through it.
Poetry recently in Australia and the world, performance poetry has been in an upswing, and more and more people who don't usually read poetry are watching spoken word poetry.
Looking for shelter, a place to lie, lay, even love a whiles. My aunt said the score was just reservation, red trash, but like good manners cost nothing. Irish Pat slipped us 20 and Cherokee met a guy in Boston who stacked the serial killers.
I think the feedback you get from audiences is a part of the development of poetry onto the page afterwards and during the gig. I get heckled a lot at poetry gigs, which I think it should be. Poetry shouldn't always be a quiet, reserved, refined pastime. It needs to be in pubs as well as on stages and at festivals.
A long dick or a long piece?
Both. Long dicks make long pussies. This is the age of Jar. Don't ask me where I got that from. Bob Marley does right. This is the age of Jar. The age of boneyard words, of pseudo-normality complexes, of braided flatulence, of merciless heat, of GBH in the name of love, of candy lies, of empty minds, of honey traps, of beautiful contamination, of vanity vestibules, of small evils, of necessary immoralities. This is the age of off-white, of roulette orange, of blackberry lube, of organic principles, of imperative viscosity, of
more words put out, and the life of a transgender poet, and how it's hard just being a transgender person and getting up on the stage and having to look one thing and open your mouth and sound like another is not easy to overcome, and that's, I think, why a lot of people from minority backgrounds don't necessarily read poetry, even though they may write it. And I've been able to do that, I think, because the poetry has an edge to it that people forget. That's the object of me being up there, is people to forget that I'm actually who I am, and to listen and associate with the words.
Occupation, kissing cousins with herpes to share. Of soft spores, machine girls, the age of full dilation capabilities. Of mobile monitoring, discount travel, farm stays and murdered junkets. Of Lady Gaga, of banality and sterility. This is the age of Jar. Thank you.
Having read all around Australia, my adopted country, in the past 3 or 4 years, I'm looking now to read, especially in Europe, but more so in the UK and Ireland. My heritage is Irish, and I've never actually been to Ireland, and I get a lot of feedback on my poetry from the United Kingdom and Ireland. And I think I'd bring something different from the poets that are already there.
All good up there?
Oh, it's so bright up here. Or dull, as the thing may be. There's a bit more on there, actually. Okay, this is a new poem. It was only written the day before yesterday, so it's probably going to be shit. It's a love poem because... fuck off, Tammy. Stop the heckling. You shouldn't be heckled by the person who's doing the emceeing, eh? It's to my girl. There she is, there in the shadows. We've got this thing about writing love poems at the moment, so she writes one, I write one. It's the whole fuck, fuck, fuck thing. And we read them to each other in bed. It's really cool. And this is untitled, okay? Sunlight takes 8 minutes to illuminate her wares. The picnic basket she carries around between her legs. A movable feast, invariably consumed on unconsecrated ground.
I think from being away from your home country, your environment adds something to your poetry. You're never really away from your own country. You're always kind of, a lot of the poems in the first book, for example, were based on my childhood in England and growing up and family. So I think delivering those in my home setting would add something to the experience, and I think the poetry and the festival or the poetry event would be richer.
A smooth white leg accelerates matters. Connection dilates, focuses my pinprick mind on the goose steps to heaven. Theology collapses, art relapses, enter synapses. Recreated as a synthetic synthesis, aided and abetted by the radiant energy emitted from a bejeweled trap, the geyser sings a lullaby. I see Bodicea.
The countries I have followings in are Australia naturally. New Zealand I do quite well, although I haven't read there either yet, though I did live there for 2 years. So the UK, but Ireland is probably the main following for my poetry. A lot of people comment in Ireland on my poetry, and a lot of the poetry is picked up and published there.
If I was a priest, I'd get to do this every Sunday, and I get to wear a dress.
Lucky you haven't.
This light's not good for me, but whatever. This is a poem about going back to Normanville. Anybody know where Normanville is?
Yes.
So I think it's something in the water, but it's called Vacationary Tale on Woodsmoke. They left bacon in the fridge, pig, think about it, and port wine and a wood heater ready to flare. Like I was, like I am, about fauna of alienation. Back among the vines and driftwood, in their bosom, without their realisation bar one invading, watching England dreaming, winning, climbing, fascinated with Woodstock, Jimmy Janis, mud, drugs, guts, pissing it up on and fucking in daylight darkness in between.
Well, India, my stuff sells quite well, funnily enough. Poetry in India, novels in America, even though the novels are English set, well, one is American, but I think mainly poetry, I get a lot of interest from Japan, which is strange because I don't have a Japanese translation of the poetry book. But I think it's more the image in Japan. At one time they wanted to make a doll of me, for example, in Japan, which just beggars belief for a poet. But I guess if I got a Japanese translated book, I may end up touring Japan. But a lot of poetry is image. I think it's becoming more and more like that. And the poets who can project an image or have something to say are getting the better gigs and getting moved around. I don't think this is necessarily so at festivals. I still think festivals are based on poetry and audiences sitting listening to poetry. But I think there's a dimension in every festival where there can be something that's a little bit more, not entertaining, but a little bit more out of the box, a little bit more left of centre, where it's not perhaps what the crowd expect. And much as I don't like being put into that position, I sometimes find myself playing that role.
Atomic train spotting. Your fecundity precedes you. Nuclear ionisation drips avidity. Dunking junkyard metaphors and watertight alibis. Puritanical homilies woven by psalm-beaten pilgrims in gossamer text. Strapped into nerve-ending...
In the future, I think for me, I'd like to have another poetry book. I like to read more poetry live, which is the point of this DVD. Novels, I think I'm done with memoirs. I think I want to move to fiction. Poetry as a longer form occupation, I don't know. I find it very taxing on me.
And this is me. Slipknot Love Shots. I did this at Slam actually, and I scored the lowest fucking score of the night. You were there, yeah. Soccer Mums. Yeah, I was reading to Soccer Mums. They didn't fucking like me at all, so whatever. Yellow water raft down my urinary tract. Damn my rapids with your schizophrenic DNA. Call me collect, STI. Give me.
I may do something that's out of this country. So, you know, maybe write poetry if I'm in England, or write something that really appeals to me. Maybe a verse novel. I don't know. But I'd still like to perform it. I think I've got so much poetry, 200-300 poems now, racked up.
Give me that bitch of a virus, your saliva running in rivulets, your juices in shot glasses, my desire the chaser to the codeine hoof. You slug one, I slug one, until the subconscious wanes and the conscience growls guttural. And I see your retinas bloodshot and mainlined in my crosshairs.
When I do write poetry, I can be quite prolific, so it doesn't make them good, but they have themes, and yeah, there's just everything kind of fits together, and it's not conventional poetry. It's not what poets or people who judge poetry competitions would look at and say, well, that's a fantastic poem, but I don't write it for that reason. I'm not interested so much in the structure of it. I'm interested in how the words reverberate with the people who are listening to it, which I think a lot of poets kind of miss, and that's why a lot of people will come out of poetry and say, well, that was pretty boring.
In the chasm of fragility we bind to receptors and raptors of our kind. Copulate in mammaldom. You load me full of spores, I flood you full of vagrant codependency. Your organ and my organ under the big top, mosh pitting to tribal chants on a 3-tiered day, lying like